You're listening to The Whole Truth, a Resources Rising Stars podcast.
David Flanagan is bauxited, and that's not a mistake by me. He really is bauxited. Bauxite has got Flanagan excited. He's always excited, even in the worst possible times, but he's a man in a rush. And when you listen to this podcast, this latest episode of The Whole Truth, you'll see why he is so bauxited. The company has the Niagara Bauxite Project in Guinea. It's just finished a major drilling program which it says will underpin a maiden JORC resource. That will then follow through into a scoping study. The company's only got a market cap of $20 million. Flanagan makes the point that basically it's hard to see any downside here, and it's very difficult to disagree with him. This project has already returned some fantastic drilling results. The world wants more bauxite. It's one of those markets China cannot tip on its head because it simply doesn't have its own resources. It's a price taker, and it needs the bauxite because aluminium is in everything, as we know, from beer cans to cars. Whether they've got batteries or petrol, they use aluminium. Flanagan says he's got a resource, or will soon have a resource, that he believes can help meet the world's growing demand for bauxite, which is also being met with shrinking supplies. Flanagan's his usual energetic self. He's driven here. He thinks he's on a winner. He's got the bit between his teeth. He also has some iron ore at this project in Guinea, but that's taking a back seat compared to the bauxite, which has come in over the top thanks to the drilling results. Have a listen to this. Have a look at the market cap and see if you think there's anything but upside in this stock. David, you're a man for doing things in a rush. You're known for being in a hurry. You walk fast, you talk fast, you drill fast. This company's called Arrow Minerals. People would say that's no accident. You're going fast as a speeding arrow. You've had this bauxite project for 5 minutes and you've just put out a release saying you're about to calculate a maiden resource. How does that happen?
Firstly, you got a team that's working really hard, and we did go and drill 184 holes into a project that Vale had already sort of pre-drilled for us, so we knew where to go. But I'm feeling pretty lucky, but we worked pretty hard to get the luck we've got.
Yeah. So you are, to coin a phrase, a bit bauxited.
Yes,
one might say.
Like the Incredible Bulk.
So let's look at this, because the listener would say, hang on, you've had a bauxite project in Guinea for 5 minutes. You're talking about doing a resource on it followed by a scoping study, but there's a lot more to it. You had a head start when you acquired this project, didn't you? Because Vale, the Brazilian giant, had a bit of a crack at it some years ago. So you knew that there was bauxite mineralisation there. You just didn't know whether there was enough to make it be a goer. Yeah.
So on the back of Vale's drilling, which was like 800 by 800 metre spacings. Now, it's not JORC compliant, but if you hit a 1 metre block of mineralisation on that spacing and your block's that big, it contributes a lot of tonnes. So we've used that and a bunch of mapping and sampling and other explorers to define exploration targets on the ground of 170 to 340 million tonnes at 40 to 46. Now, we didn't sort of just pluck that number from the air. There is a very, very strong, reasonable basis for that target. And we've gone in and we're basically drilling 3 of the prospects that have contributed to that resource. And there's 9 in total. So we've drilled about a third. And we're basically convinced that on what we found, there's a reasonable basis to proceed to a scoping study. So we're doing the scoping study work while we're doing the resource work and while we're doing exploration and permitting work. So we're doing it all.
So there's a lot of things happening at the same time. As we said, you're a man that walks fast and talks fast. But
well, that's what shareholders pay.
And that's what makes money for shareholders, absolutely. Yeah. But one of the things that we need to look at here is that the drilling has already outlined mineralisation over, 14 square kilometres?
So for those of you with a calculator in front of you, we've got 14 square kilometres of high-grade mineralisation. So high-grade mineralisation going 45% today is getting 30% higher price than iron ore. Okay, so we found 14 square kilometres of that, and we've told the market that the thickness of it is between 4 and 5 metres. Right, so everyone knows that the bulk density of bauxite's about 2. So you wrap all that together, and clearly we've got something of substance which needs to be progressed all the way through permitting to development.
Now, you're not allowed to say what happens when you press the equals button on the calculator on that equation, but nonetheless, anyone who can work that out would obviously can tell from where you're going to here. You're pretty confident you're going to get a maiden JORC resource of some substance.
Yeah, so
scale.
So I first started working in mining post-graduation, so 1992, 93, right? And I reckon this is the first time I've ever had a chance to work on a tier 1 mineral deposit. Okay, so this to me feels like what the last 35 years have been getting me ready for.
Right. So when you do that equation, you obviously have some pretty reasonable confidence about where you're going to land. The reason you're in such a hurry, though, to do the resource, because you say there's obviously open, you've only done 3 of 9 targets. People would say, well, why don't you just keep drilling the rest of the targets and see how big this thing gets?
Yeah, good question, right? So, because some people, the traditional view, like if you've gone to bigcompany.com School of Geology, quite often what they'll do is they'll sit there and they'll find a big target, then they'll drill out the whole resource, then they'll drill it some more, and then they'll drill it some more, and then they'll do some studies, and they'll work out how big it can be, and then off they go, right? And they try to develop the project that's going to make the most amount of money. Now, it would appear logical that you should go and develop the project that's the most profitable, but that's actually not the job of me in my role. The job is to make the most money for shareholders. And for me and for our business, the way to make the most money for shareholders is to re-rate the company as quick as possible. So there's a trade-off between trying to develop the biggest project with the largest capital cost and the longest life versus the most efficient use of capital to get into production as quickly as possible, to get your stock re-rated as quickly as possible, because we are a single project-focused company and our plan is to become a mining company as quickly as we can.
Right. So that strategy all leads to the conclusion.
Drill enough holes to find something viable.
That is big enough.
Just get cracking.
Yeah. So that is big enough to be economic.
Boom.
On its own right. So you obviously think you're kind of there, but you can't do the economics with a study until such time as you've got a JORC resource.
Oh, look, yes, that's correct. So I can't publish that study, but we have been doing economic studies on this project since before we did the deal.
So
we worked out.
You know where it's heading, but as you say, you can't publish that. So the upside in the stock here is that once you get that JORC resource on the table, that allows you then to publish the economic forecasts of the project, which means you can demonstrate to the market how much money you stand to make.
Yeah. So I reckon that right now in West Africa, with a project like this, we reckon we need X, and we think that we've got that standing on our head. Right.
So let's go to the timetable, because investors would listen to this and say, where do I need to be in the stock? How does this work? Maiden JORC resource by March?
About sort of 9 weeks away, 10 weeks away from having that resource out, say the end of March. And then we'll publish a scoping study mid-year. And there'll be drilling that'll happen also throughout the year. There'll be more targets to define. There'll be met work. There'll be engagement with customers. There could be some announcements on that. There'll be all sorts of communication about geology that we've learnt, met studies that we've learnt. Guinea has got very, very favourable characteristics in producing beautiful ore. The Guinea ore is just one of the best in the world. So we're going to be, producing results on that. And it's probably likely that the ore will have some sort of gallium in it. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the world gets gallium from its bauxite. So there'll be a bit of that in there.
So in the past, bauxite has traditionally been the domain of the big boys with a couple of exceptions. So would there be a prospect here to say, hey, this is what we've got already, we've got all these other targets and it's open, etc. Would you look at bringing a big boy in?
Yeah, look, we would, but culturally our experience to date is most of them move very slowly, and their culture and ours, whilst, they don't have bad culture, it's like we're talking a different language. But I tell you what, they are making so much money. So I feel like I've just almost like got the Da Vinci Code and looking at some of these businesses. Like these guys in the hills here, without naming names, doing 12 million tonnes a year of alumina, right? Making a $300 a tonne margin, US. So you think about they are huge numbers, and it's been the domain of the majors. I don't think that needs to be the case forever.
But it has been, unfairly or unkindly, should we say, labelled as boring bauxite, hasn't it? it's not been the thing that, investors are normally associate with being sexy or indeed particularly lucrative as a punter.
Yeah.
That's changing though.
Well, people used to say that about iron ore, Paul.
They did when it was dominated by BHP and Rio.
Yeah.
So, but these days you'd say, well, bauxite has some very favourable market dynamics. The world is basically running short of bauxite.
Yeah, well, look at Metro Mining, right? They've come out of nowhere and they are now like institutional company, market cap $300-400 million out of nowhere. So there's them, there's us, there's going to be many more, and we think we're at like a roughie ready to rock.
Now, bauxite obviously makes alumina, makes aluminium. Aluminium's now at the core of everything, whether it's a battery-powered car or a petrol car.
Yeah, the only place to get aluminium is bauxite.
But it brings us to the obvious question: where does China fit into the scene here?
So China's taking about 60 to 70% of the bauxite out of Guinea. To date, they've sort of had pretty big bauxite operations themselves, but they're running out. So they're starting to rely more and more on the rest of the world.
So that's a key driver in the supply-demand balance.
It is. So, anything like all the buildings, window frames, cars, aluminium components, they all need bauxite to go into them. There's a lot of recycling. There's a lot of aluminium made in the US as well. A lot of aluminium made in Canada.
But China is a price taker, in effect.
Yeah, they consume probably about half the world's bauxite.
Yeah, they can't pull a stunt like they can with rare earths or gallium and these other things. They've got to go with the global market.
Well, it's the bauxite market is about 450 million tonnes. It's massive. There's a lot of supply from a lot of different countries. Look, at the moment we're all connected at the hip a bit here, Paul. It's the same with iron ore.
So it's a big market, but China doesn't have the supply to be able to upend it. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, they can't. Yeah, they have to have imported bauxite.
So therefore, this is one of the reasons that bauxite, I think, is becoming quite sexy of late. Now, the bauxite price just before Christmas, you referenced it at the start of this conversation. A tonne of bauxite became worth more than a tonne of iron ore for the first time.
Yeah, it sort of went through it a couple of times over that period, but now, like today, bauxite price sits about 30% higher than iron ore.
All right, so it's really broken away.
Yeah.
So the next step is resource, scoping study, fast track to try and bring it into production.
Yeah, all of that. So we'll be talking to customers who can help us through the infrastructure. We'll be talking to people for permitting the mines, all the local communities, resources pending, all of the mining contractors. Conversations have started. Road contractors, SRK arrive on site this weekend. They'll be in there doing their, they've got to do an audit. It's just a bit like, a finance audit, and then that will feed into the resource. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned infrastructure. Of course, bulk commodities like bauxite and iron ore are all about infrastructure. Some people would say they are infrastructure plays for all intents and purposes. What's your infrastructure access here?
So we're about 100 k's from the railway line, and that railway line, which is due to be commissioned this year, and Rio, appropriately conveniently announced today that everything's on schedule. That is a double track railway line designed to service the Simandou iron ore project. The Simandou project will ultimately ramp up to about 140, 160 million tonnes. Our view is that double track railway line will have like 400 million tonnes of capacity, something like that. So there's capacity on the line. It's a multi-user line. Bow Steel at Simandou have signed an MOU for mine gate sales with us. We've had approaches from other parties to do the same thing for bauxite. There's precedence in Guinea. Actually, not everyone knows this, but Rio Tinto is a third-party rail haulage service provider for other parties in Guinea. So
they're open to the idea of sharing their wares.
Exactly. So it's just the regime and the mining code in Guinea. We went to detail to explain this in some of our disclosures, is different to here. These are not private railway lines. They are multi-user, multi-access.
So you see the Simandou railway line as being your key artery, takes you to the port?
Yeah. Well, but fundamentally, our whole business model, the whole low capex business model relies on access to multi-user infrastructure. It relies on access to contracted trucks, contracted mining fleet, contracted rail, contracted trains, contracted port. So our whole business, we'll pay for all of that and we'll give those guys an attractive margin and lower their group costs. But we don't have to outlay the capital. That's the benefit we get.
So you'll basically be a provider of the resource.
Yeah. So and why not? That's actually our expertise. Our expertise is defining resources, progressing them through studies, and executing them. And my expertise is not building and maintaining a truck.
No, but you'll pay someone to dig it up, someone else to cart to the port.
Yeah,
and it really ends there and then.
Yeah, and through the process, Guinea has become a world leader, not just in supplying massive tonnages of bauxite, but actually in the mining methods. So it's now very, very normal to see surface miners there. These ones that Andrew had running up at FMG in the early days, well, they're actually perfectly suited to the much softer ores in Guinea. And it looks like, the cost of mining ore with a surface miner is well under $1 a tonne.
So you mentioned iron ore. So the Simandou iron ore project is not far from you. Now, just interested in the bauxite, the Niagara Bauxite Project, came along after you're already in Guinea looking for iron ore.
Yeah.
So you're already on the ground.
Yeah, look, so no mistake, our business is to make lots of money for shareholders. And I reckon sometimes opportunities are presented to you which are so good that you'd be negligent if you walked away from them. It's a bit like, if there's a $100 note sitting on the ground in front of you, are you going to walk past it or pick it up? Well, I'm going to pick it up. And I tell you what, this Niagara thing, it smelt like a mine, looks like a mine. Let's hope it's a really good mine.
So where does this leave the iron ore project that you went to there for in the first place?
So that project is doing what we said it would do. Okay, so at the moment we've produced some beautiful, super high-grade hematite fines by just using gravity. We've got Baosteel who really, really like the idea of getting some of that product and putting it into their system. The Met test work is basically giving us those parts of the ore body to go and drill because it's expensive to drill. I only want to drill stuff that I can see a reasonable chance of turning into a mine, right? So we'll go back in and we'll drill that up and then we'll see where that takes us. But the focus is the bauxite. I would say that, I would say 80 to 90 cents out of every dollar is going to the bauxite.
Yeah. So for primarily, bauxite is going to drive your share price.
Well, it will. Well, I'd like to think so. And I'd like to, once we get the resource out, and maybe for some of the people out there watching this, they've already figured out how many tons we've got, and you times that by $130 and then compare that to the inventory of a multi-million ounce gold deposit, and you think, actually, holy shit.
What about if you compare it to the market cap of the company?
Yes. Yeah. There's just
so what is the market cap now?
It's $23 million.
So $23 million. So it wouldn't take much in terms of establishing a resource and showing a pathway to production. Yeah.
So our team have started mines before in Australia, in Africa, right? It's quite a well-worn path to get into production. We're having terrific engagement from all of the incumbents. So the conversations that we have with the guys, other people working around us like the Rios and the Baosteels are fantastic. So there's a real win-win. Guinea's going to benefit terrifically out of this. There's going to be local jobs, there'll be taxes, there'll be royalties, and there'll be social infrastructure. I'm proud to be involved in that.
Yeah, so all in all, it sounds like you're on a winner.
Fingers crossed, mate. Yeah. Well, if things keep going the way that they are, the company's going to do really well and the shareholders will do terrifically well.
Yeah, right. But the leverage is absolutely enormous.
Yeah, so I just this morning I spoke to someone who was a bit sophisticated. So these guys had worked out themselves roughly what the tonnage was, and they said there's no downside in this. So I'm on the road now. I'm talking to people and trying to get the story out there because we've had a tsunami of information hit the market. There's a lot for people to digest, and my job is to help them understand it and realise the value.
Great. Well, hopefully this little chat has helped them understand it.
Thanks,
and we'll send it out far and wide and we'll watch it. I think the next milestone will obviously be the resource, but once we get beyond that, we should be able to demonstrate to people where
all the analysts will be able to wrap numbers around it. Yeah, thanks very much for your help.
Good on you. Thanks, Flano. Speak soon.
You've been listening to The Whole Truth, a Resources Rising Stars podcast, produced by Resource Media, hosted by Paul Armstrong for Reed Corporate. Please note that Reed Corporate does not provide investment advice, and investors should seek personalised advice before making any investment decisions.